Hey, thanks everybody for coming. I can't believe it's already March and we're already getting those itchy fingers wanting to get in that ground and get some stuff done. So today we have Novalene Thurston coming to talk to us about the legacy of the three sisters. If you don't know about three sisters, you're just going to have to stick around and find out. Novalene?
All right. I don't know about you, but I'm ready for winter to be over with. Spring has teased us a couple of different times, but I'm done with it. I'm ready. I'm ready for it to be spring, and we all want to get out there in the garden. And so this is perhaps the perfect time to be thinking about this particular topic that we're going to have today. Today is the legacy of the three sisters, Native American agriculture's influence on our gardens. I know that when you think about our Native Americans, the stereotype that comes into your mind is probably a brave on horseback who lives in a teepee and hunts buffalo. And that's just not a very complete idea of how Native American life was. I would say most people in the United States, most young people, most children are never exposed to the reality of Native American culture, especially Native American culture back before the Europeans. I think we probably don't have a very good grasp even of how many Native Americans there were. That there were literally millions of people living in North America before the Europeans ever arrived. And those people had a rich culture, they had commerce, and they had gardens. Many of the Native American cultures relied heavily on food that they grew. Of course, they also foraged and left us a legacy of plants that we can use from the native environment. But today we're going to be looking at some of the ways that they grew what was normal for them to eat. Because they don't have schools, they have to teach their children some other way. This is amazing to the kids that come right here to the event that we call Pumpkin Patch. You know, I don't remember exactly what year we started Pumpkin Patch as a project of our local master gardeners, but it's been at least 15 years, hasn't it? We bring the kids from all over the county here. And the reason the story I'm about to tell you is so familiar to me is I've been telling it to second graders for that long. I even said, if you wake me up on my deathbed and ask me to tell you this story, I'll probably be able to do that. When we first got the idea of Pumpkin Patch, an educational event for our really young people here, I had to do a lot of reading. I had to do a lot of learning. And I read many Native American stories, books full of them. And I found that there was a great deal of vital cultural information being transmitted through these folk tales, through these stories. But I found that very often these stories are long and rather dark, and we were looking for ways to reach, second graders, third graders, pre-kindergarten. So many of the stories that I read simply weren't appropriate for that audience. I found out that Native American stories have very many loose ends. You're never told what happens to this person or what came next. You're just allowed to fill in with your imagination some of those things. Many of them have supernatural events. What the word that I use with the second graders is magic. Things that they couldn't explain, but happened in the stories. They often have supernatural characters as well. They frequently have animal characters, and it's interesting because the animal characters usually have a reputation. And when I do the third grade story, I ask the kids whether they know what a reputation is. Like if you hear that there is a story and there is a fox in it or a coyote, they are a trickster. Or if there is an owl, that is death. So each animal has a reputation and a thing that we expect them to do. Very often, the Indian stories have lessons in them. There was a reason why the grandmother told this story over and over to the children, because there were things that they wanted them to learn. So I'm about to tell you a story, and I'll tell you the same as I tell my second graders. As you're listening to this story, think about what the Indian grandmother wanted you to learn from this story. And maybe I'll give you a chance to offer that. We refer to this story and others as folk tales or legends, and because that is the genre that they are going to fall in their school studies. So this is the story of the three sisters. This is where we get the expression a three sisters garden. And to tell this story, I'm going to need just a little bit of help. I've asked several of you to come and occupy these seats for just a few minutes. If you three ladies will come sit here, and we have some gentlemen for these two chairs and the ladies to sit here. When we bring second graders into the storytelling room, which is one of those rooms right down the hall, we line them up and bring them in and sit them in the right spot to begin with. So here we are. And I'm going to tell you, we need one more. What? I'm going to tell you that this is the story of the Three Sisters Garden and why a Native American might refer to the land where we live as Turtle Island. Right? Now, our story begins a long time ago, and I mean a really, really long time ago. Now, what that means to second graders, a long time ago. To you grown-ups, I'll tell you, 70,000 years is about right. But a long, long time ago, right here, where we are now today, there was no land. There was only water. As far as the eye can see, there was only water. Can you say that with me? As far as the eye can see, there was only water. And up in the sky, very, very high up, there was a beautiful spirit, and her name was Blue Sky Woman. Put that shawl around you. Mm-hmm. A table no, it's a shawl. Put it around. Blue Sky Woman loved to sit on the edge of the clouds and look down at the water. And that was interesting to her because in the water, there were all kinds of fish swimming in the water. Can you show me how many fish there were in the water? That's right. But of all the things that she loved to watch, her very favorites were Brother Frog and Brother Turtle. Brother Frog and Brother Turtle were very, very good friends. They weren't alike, but they loved to play together. They told stories and played jokes and had a good time. And Blue Sky Woman every day loved to look down and see Brother Frog and Brother Turtle having a good time. But one day something terrible happened. Blue Sky Woman leaned over too far. And when she did, she lost her balance. And when she lost her balance, she began to falling. And this is terrible because Blue Sky Woman does not know how to swim. So when she falls in the water, she is going to drown. And all the fish looked up, but none of them could think of anything that they could do to save Blue Sky Woman. But you know, Brother Frog is a very smart fellow. Brother Frog had an idea. I can save Blue Sky Woman if you'll help me, he said to his friend Brother Turtle. There's no time to explain. Will you just do what I ask you to do? And Brother Turtle, of course, said, yes, what do you want me to do? And Brother Frog said, we need to swim all the way down to the bottom. And they did that. They swam and they swam all the way down to the bottom of the water. And when they got there, Brother Frog started gathering up handfuls of mud. He's a puppet. You can stick your hand up inside. No, there you go. Yeah, there you go. He began to gather up the mud and he put it on top of Turtle. One scoop, another scoop, another scoop, until Brother Turtle was completely covered with mud. And then something magic happened. Brother Turtle began to grow, and Brother Turtle got bigger and bigger and bigger until finally all the water was pushed away. And as far as the eye can see, there was only mud. And so when Blue Sky Woman fell, she didn't fall into the water and she did not drown. Of course, I'm sure she got very dirty, but she wasn't worried about that. She jumped up and she looked around. She said, oh, I am so grateful. My life has been saved. And then she looked around and all she saw was mud in every direction. And that wasn't very beautiful. And she thought, I am going to send a blessing to this land so that it will be better. And sure enough, a few days after that, a little sprout began to grow up out of the mud. Put that shawl around you. It was Sister Corn. Sister Corn grows fast. She's tall and straight and strong. When she stands there with her long green leaves, she has yellow tassels on top of her head and little fruits along the side. Sister Corn. And a few days later, another sprout came up out of the mud. It was not the same, though. This was Sister Bean. Now, Sister Bean is not tall or straight or strong, but she's very smart. She has an ability that is very special. Sister Bean can make the soil better for all plants to grow. So, Sister Bean, all you have to do to grow tall is reach out and hold Sister Corn's hand. Now you can grow up together, and because you're making the soil better, that's helping Sister Corn. And then in a few days, another plant came out of the soil. It was the most beautiful one of all. It was Sister Squash. Now, Sister Squash has great big leaves and beautiful big yellow flowers. She is so pretty, but she is lazy. Sister Squash is so lazy that she doesn't even want to grow up tall. She's perfectly happy spreading out across the ground. But the good thing is, with those great big green leaves, the shade that she makes keeps everybody's toes cool and helps keep the weeds from growing. So here we have our three sisters: Sister Corn, Sister Bean, Sister Squash. Not the same, but working together. What do we have? We have a garden, don't we? And many years later, when the people came to live in this land, they found a garden full of good things to eat. And that is the story of the Three Sisters Garden. And that is why, if you ask a Native American where he lives, he might tell you, I live on Turtle Island. And the turtle is the symbol for the land. And that's the story that we tell to the second graders. Now, if there's plenty of time, which there actually never is, I like to ask the kids, what lessons do you think the Indian grandmother wanted the little children to learn from this story? And of course, sometimes they want to answer by telling me about the garden and the plants, but the answer that I'm really looking for is working together, teamwork, and gratitude. What should you do when someone does something nice for you? You give a blessing back. If they can get those two ideas across, then that's probably more important than actually how to plant a garden. But of course, you're not second graders. And so for the rest of this time, we're going to talk about how to plant that Three Sisters garden. Okay, you can leave your props behind, and thank you so much for participating. And yes, if you have looked at the picture on the slide, that is a photograph of a snapping turtle that has just come out of hibernation. And they really do sometimes crawl out of the ground with quite a bit of dirt on their shells. I did not take that picture. I've never seen one that perfectly covered, but I have seen turtles come out of hibernation in a very muddy condition. So I imagine that just about all of the Native American stories have some origin with some kid asking some grown-up to explain something that they have observed. Now, how does traditional Native American agriculture differ from European agriculture? What were the Indians doing that was different from how we do things. We're going to talk about the tools that they had, the domesticated animal situation, and food preservation. First of all, the tools. They lived in a situation with no iron tools. In some cultures, they had a little bit of copper. And of course, down in Mesoamerica, they had gold and silver. But if you can imagine trying to make a plow out of those metals, wouldn't work. So tools were a problem. Basically, they had digging sticks, either actual sticks or even bone. So they're behind the Europeans in the tools department. They're also way behind in the domesticated animals department. All they had, as far as domesticated animals, were dogs. And while dogs can be utilized a little bit for transport, dragging things, you never figure out how to make a dog pull a plow. So that was a handicap. Food preservation, well, they did have a pretty good handle on that. Remember, nobody in colonial times, nobody was canning. So they had drying and salting. And that was about it. And food preservation was a constant problem. How does traditional Native American differ also in terms of what they were growing? It is surprising to realize how much of the food that is on our plate is a North American native. Quite a bit of it. When I see the list of foods that we eat commonly and subtract from that list everything that is Native American, there's actually not much left. And if you can imagine that that's the Europeans before Christopher Columbus, their diet was pretty plain, really. The Native Americans also made a lot of use of wild plants, including a number that we no longer make much use of. So that was different. If you have never heard the expression, the Columbian Exchange, this was the big sharing that went on in the 100 to 200 years after Christopher Columbus arrived. We received things and we sent things. And if you'll just look at that list, some of it's good and some of it is not so good. You see that we received livestock. And the one piece of livestock that's not on this list that really deserves to be is the European honeybee. It was brought over very early by the Pilgrims. We got cattle and horses and pigs and goats and sugar and rice and just a lot of kinds of plants and animals. But we sent a few things back. We sent maize. Now, let me explain a confusion here. Corn, the plant that you're thinking about right now, corn, its scientific name, which was given to it by Carolus Linnaeus back in the days when things were first being named, its name is Zea, Z-E-A, maize, M-A-Y-S. And in most parts of the world, the word maize, M-A-I-Z-E, as it's often found, is actually referring to what we know as corn. We Americans refer to another related plant as maize. And what we're likely to mean when we say maize is also called milo. And it's the little red round seeds about the size of a BB that you find in your bird seed. Okay. We call that maize, and we call corn, and then everybody else calls corn maize. And just if you start trying to figure out stuff on a global basis, just keep that in mind. All right. Now we sent maize, potatoes from Central and South America, tobacco, beans, certain kinds of beans, the beans we're most familiar with, squash, and that includes squash, pumpkins, all the melon kinds of, most of the melon kinds of things, peppers, and chocolate. We sent those things. We also sent them syphilis, and we traded syphilis for smallpox. I think probably the smallpox and the syphilis, was that an even trade? I don't know. Smallpox just about wiped out the Native Americans. So this is the Columbian Exchange, and it is a very, very interesting topic all by itself. Now back to the Three Sisters. The Three Sisters is a companion planting, and companion planting as a topic is a very worthwhile thing to learn about. But people have either a great faith or a great skepticism about the whole idea. Keep in mind that Mother Nature does a whole lot of companion planting. Out there in nature, you don't see very many monocultures. Mostly what you see is associations of different plants that frequently grow together. So purposely doing this in our garden or in our flower bed can have a real reason. One of the reasons we might want to do it is pest control. Many pests like to specialize on a particular family of plants. And if you're growing everything in your garden is from that one family, then you've just laid out a buffet for a few particular insects. You've made it very easy on them. But if what you've done is mixed up different families of plants, you may discourage having so many pests that are specialists. Now, some insects are generalists and they're going to eat anything that you plant, but a lot of the things we see in our garden are kind of picky, and they're going to come when you plant the thing that they want to eat. So thinking about that can help you minimize your pests. You can even sometimes plant a certain area of something just for the bugs. You call those a trap crop. And they're sacrificed in the hope that the bugs will leave your plants alone. That works sometimes. I'm not going to guarantee that. Sometimes we plant companions for soil benefits, and that's true anytime you're using a Three Sisters garden approach, because anything in the family of beans, if the bacteria that they need are in the soil, they're going to add nitrogen to the soil through the nitrogen cycle. And in agriculture, we very frequently suggest rotating on the same soil a legume for a year or two, followed by a grain for a year or two. And we find that doing that regularly benefits the soil and reduces the amount of fertilizer that you might need to put on your ground. And then, of course, there's planting companions for culinary or nutritional benefits. Put a basil plant beside your tomato. You're going to need them the same day anyway, right? Okay, so the three sisters, there really is a reason behind the story. Now, another thing that's different in Native American agriculture and the way we frequently do things is the fact that we often in our gardens plant things in rows. You ever wonder why you do that? What's the history of planting a garden in rows? Well, it goes all the way back to great grandpa that was plowing with a mule. That's the way animal agriculture developed. But what if you don't have an animal to pull a plow? There would be no reason to feel like you needed to plant things in long, straight rows. So, in the original concept, the three sisters are planted as a mound with corn in the middle, beans around that so that they can grow up, and squash everywhere else because squash grow everywhere else. Here's an example of a Three Sisters application, but in rows. And this is my garden a few years ago. And the way I had that row of beans laid out was I had some actually they were lids to cattle tubs, and I threw them out there just to keep the weeds down and to help me make a nice circle. And then around that went a soaker hose. And then on top of that went one of these. Now, that's for your beans. And I will tell you, we learned a lot doing that. I'm short, okay? It's very easy. It's very easy to build a bean teepee that's too tall. And when we talk about beans, you'll understand why. These right here were just about right. I could reach the top of them. But that was after 2 or 3 years of doing it wrong, okay? Okay, let's take each one of the three sisters for just a minute, and let's talk first about corn. Corn is one of our most valuable crops because whether you are just a vegetable gardener or whether you are in agronomy, whether you are in production agriculture, there's just so many things that are made from corn. Corn was domesticated by the Native Americans in Central Asia, Central America, Mexico, from a plant that still grows wild down there. It's called teosinte. And the little ear on a teosinte is about the size of your little finger and has 5 or 6 or 7 little things that we call kernels. No, it's not. It's not the same, but the size, the length of it is, no, that particular thing, that is a particular variety of corn that's grown for that market. But yeah, you're right. That's a full-grown ear of teosinte. It had been improved by the Native Americans. By the time the Spanish arrived in Mexico, they found corn with ears like this and many kernels in various colors. And so for about 7,000 years, the Native Americans had been growing corn and doing selection for the properties that made it a good crop. It became not only a staple of their diet, but also trade goods. So corn, dry corn, was traded from band to band and was found across a wide part of North America, not just in the area where we find teosinte. The types of corn that we grow now include what we generally refer to as field corn, which often gets 8 feet tall and makes usually 1 or possibly 2 ears per stalk. It is harvested when it is fully and completely dry and ripe if you are harvesting it for the kernels. And for us around here, think of deer corn, okay? That's the same corn that might be going to the ethanol plant, okay? There have been a number of improvements in field corn, including a recent improvement that makes it more digestible for livestock feed. But we have to be careful that that kind doesn't get into our human food because it makes a change in the texture of the ground corn that they use to make chips with. And you literally can't make good corn chips out of it. So don't worry about getting that corn in our diet because it needs to all go to the cows so they can digest it better. All kinds of change in the last few years. Now, we also have what you refer to as sweet corn, right? And if you're growing corn in your garden, you're growing a kind of corn that does not quickly change the sugar in the kernel into starch. So you can harvest it for a longer period of time and it be tender and sweet. This idea of sweet corn, golden bantam is the heritage variety of corn, but there are dozens of kinds. And the popular thing now is the bicolor, the ones that, they got some white kernels and some yellow kernels. And just keep in mind that that is a reminder that every one of those kernels was actually a separate flower. Okay, there are a whole lot of separate flowers all on one central spike. Okay, and of course, there's also popcorn, which gets only probably about this tall and is fun to grow and very decorative. And other kinds of decorative corn that you might choose to grow. But corn has some problems. The first problem that I would mention is pollination. All the pollen on top has got to fall on what you know as the silks at the right stage of their development. And corn is completely wind pollinated. And because it is wind pollinated, it doesn't work very well if you plant it in that one long row. As you're driving around the county, you'll see, a garden here and there and a long single row of corn. I'll guarantee you, they didn't get a very good harvest. In order for corn to do well, you need to plant it in a big block where the pollen has a better chance of falling on the silk. Because if you plant it in a long straight row and the winds blow in the wrong direction on that perfect day, you may not get any pollinating at all. So, corn in the vegetable garden has a heavy nitrogen requirement. It is a heavy nitrogen feeder, as all leafy things tend to be. And planting time and harvest time are very, very important. If you want to know when to plant corn, you need to ask TJ, okay? Because because he would be able to tell you exactly when to plant your corn. If you plant it too soon, it will rot, and you will have to plant it over. And then watch your harvest time, because if you wait too long, it's not going to be what you want. And especially if you have chosen to plant what are called the super sweet varieties, you can only plant that one variety. You can't plant a bunch of different ones, because when they cross pollinate, they're not sweet anymore. I'm sure that all of us at some point have opened up a really pretty ear of corn to find a worm inside. Now, not as much maybe as when we were growing up, but it's still a problem in a home garden. And that's the corn earworm. The corn earworm is a very close relative of the army worm. Okay? We know how much we love them. Corn earworms lay a number of eggs on the plant, and they crawl into and down, basically eat their way in, but they're cannibals. And so you hardly ever find two worms in the same ear. That's because you're seeing the winner. Okay. How do you get rid of those things? Well, because it's a caterpillar, one of our best answers to that is BT. You know, that spray that has the bacteria in it that is a disease of caterpillars. That's your best shot. But another kind of an old-fashioned remedy that works is a spoonful of mineral oil poured down the throat of that little developing ear. At silk, yeah, at the silk. And if you're using BT spray, you'll probably have to time that BT spray, you know, right before you think it's going to get pollinated, and then maybe again, and then maybe again, to keep them out for long enough. Now, if you dig up your corn, you might come across a corn rootworm. Now, the corn rootworm is actually the larva of a beetle, and I'm going to show you the adult in a few minutes. But the corn rootworm is a brown, hard, shiny, little thin worm-looking thing. It is the larva of a beetle, and it's a bad thing, which you will see occasionally. And then, of course, there are grasshoppers. And so those are some of the most common pests that you might run across if you try to grow corn in your small garden. Just literally mineral oil. Literally go to the grocery store or the pharmacy and just plain mineral oil. It's non-toxic. I don't think we digest it, and it's gone by the time we eat it anyway. But apparently they just can't handle being in that oily environment. Yeah, that's an old remedy. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to beans. I'm going to say that if you don't have a pretty good sized garden, growing corn may not be your best idea, because it takes a lot of space to get enough to really matter. If you like to grow enough vegetables in your garden to actually can and freeze and use, corn's fun, but it takes a lot of space to grow a good bit of it. Beans, on the other hand, you can get a lot of beans in a small amount of space. We have worldwide a number of different species of beans that we can grow very successfully in our garden. But when we think of beans as gardeners, we probably first of all think of green beans, which we are eating at an immature stage and which don't have to be green. As that basket illustrates, green beans come in at least 3 colors. The purple is disappointing because the purple pigment is very water soluble. So as soon as you boil them, they're green. but they're fun to grow and they're easy to spot. When you've got a tower of beans, the purple ones, you won't overlook them. They come. First of all, I will say, if you're going to grow green beans, you need to decide how much you want to bend over when it's time to pick. Because if you're like me and you don't enjoy bending over, you're going to want to grow what are called pole beans. And pole beans, it's like when Teresa was talking to us last month, determinate and indeterminate. The pole bean is an indeterminate. It's going to grow upward and it's going to bloom and it's going to make beans. And as long as you keep them picked off, they'll continue to produce. And they'll produce over a long period of time. But if you don't mind bending over and you'd like all your beans to be ripe at the same time, you want bush beans. And my idea was I planted my bush beans in tubs or raised beds. Then you don't have to bend over quite so far. And so that's my advice for beans. Beans need to have the right bacteria in the soil, or they will not be fixing nitrogen. And if you are not sure that your soil has that right kind of bacteria, and how could you be sure? You can put it there. You can buy a preparation of the right kind of bacteria, and I would recommend that you do that in soil that has never grown beans before, and inoculate that soil. And then from then on, don't need to worry about it. Garden soil inoculant is what you're looking for. And most of the larger seed companies will have that product. You just shake it on. Now, in production agriculture, a lot of the legumes that we plant are pre-inoculated. They've already got the stuff that was put on the beans as a powder before it was ever sold. But as a home gardener, I'd recommend this. We grow a lot of kinds of beans. There's a list, and you probably eat most of those or have grown some of them. Field peas, garden beans, peanuts. Peanuts grow real well around here. It's just nobody does it anymore. So they're very good, and we ought to be growing more of them. One good thing about beans, they're very easy to do direct sow. And so you don't have to start them in a greenhouse and transplant them and all that work. You don't need to do that. But one thing that is good is to plant them and then a couple of weeks later plant some more, and a couple of weeks later plant some more, especially if you're growing the bush beans that are all going to be ready to harvest at one time. And that will spread out your food preservation work later on. Beans have a lot of diseases. That is a mosaic disease right there. The diseases are mostly viruses, and our garden insects are how they get from plant to plant most of the time. Be aware, deer love garden beans. They can eat all of your beans in one night. Ask me how I know. It does not matter. They love them all. Or purple or yellow, they don't care. They love them all. Right. Our last sister is squash, of course. Squash come in a lot of different varieties. It's interesting to watch the little children come to pumpkin patch. And, some of them probably don't like to eat squash. But then they find out that pumpkins are squash. They're just one particular kind of squash. So we grow a lot of squash in the vegetable gardens around here. When I first came here, met a fella, got to know him. We did 4-H dog club together, and he said, now be sure that when you go to church, lock your doors. And I thought that was very strange. And he said, because if you don't lock your door when you get out, it'll be full of zucchini. Your car will be full of zucchini. Yeah. So a lot of people grow squash, and if it weren't for the bugs, we'd all grow squash. But we do have a lot of squash that are great for this climate. So understand that squash are insect pollinated, mostly by native, not by European, but by native bees, especially bumblebees. Bumblebees are outstanding for pollinating squash. The flower of squash opens in the morning, if you have noticed it, but closes pretty soon. So if you have to put out insecticides in your garden in an area where there's squash, wait until late in the day when today's flowers are all folded up and tomorrow's flowers aren't open yet. So we'd rather not use insecticides at all, but at least be careful with your timing on that. We grow winter and summer squash, and there's confusion about that. You don't grow winter squash in the winter. Winter squash is simply squash that we allow them to mature, and the skin is pretty hard, and they do keep very well. So that would be your acorn squash and your butternut squash and so forth. And summer squash are the yellow squash and the zucchini, those kinds of things. It's interesting how many people, the idea of summer squash and winter squash, they don't get that. Understand squash varieties, just as in our story, they love to spread. And if you can arrange for them to grow upward on a trellis and you tie them regularly, you might be able to win that battle for at least a while. But understand that they want to spread out. A few of our companies are selling what they call bush squash. I really don't know whether you can trust that or not. I think they all want to run. They do like to be direct sown. Transplanting them is tricky. If you decide to buy sets of squash, be very, very gentle when you are putting them in the ground. Or if you're like me and you get excited because there's 4 different seeds that have come up in that same little 6-pack, and you think, oh boy, I'm really getting my money's worth now. But you have to be very, very careful that you don't break them when you separate them. They're very tricky, and it's awfully easy to just direct sow them. Here's some of the things you're going to fight if you try to grow squash. See that one at the top, the spotted cucumber beetle. That is the adult of the southern corn rootworm. Well, the spotted cucumber beetle loves to get on squash even when they are just sprouted. When they first have just the cotyledons, the seed leaves, they'll get after them right then. But I will tell you that, they're the size of a lady beetle. They're no bigger than that. And if you hold them carefully between 2 fingers and go like that, no more problem with that one, okay? They're very easy to squish. And as I've told some of you, if you just don't think you can do that, you get you a bag of frozen peas and you practice with frozen peas. And when you can squish a frozen pea, you can squish a cucumber beetle. You can do it. Even more than cucumber beetles, we hate them because they carry disease. But then there's the squash bug. Nothing really and truly works. Nothing. You can try all kinds of things, but get out there early, catch them when there aren't very many of them, trap them, cut them in half with your nippers, encourage them to fall into a bowl of soapy water. Do what you can, look at the base of the plant, and plant enough squash that some of them can die and you'll still be okay. The other thing that hits us is squash vine borers. And Squash vine borer is actually, that's a moth. It's a moth that flies in the daytime and looks almost like a wasp, but it's out there laying eggs on the stems of your favorite squash. The thing is hard to control because the caterpillar digs into the stem and lives inside the stem, and it's hard to get insecticides in there. But I'll tell you what will happen. You'll have several squash, but one of them is your favorite. You'll go out there one morning and it will be completely wilted, and you'll take a hold of that plant and it's no longer connected to the ground. And it was your favorite. I guarantee you it was the best one. You can trim off some of those leaves, stick it in the ground, water it real good, and you might just be able to have it survive as a cutting. But the culprit was the squash vine borer. There was a caterpillar inside that stem that finally ate enough of the stem from the inside out that the stem was going to break. That's what happened to you. Now, those are your three sisters. There are a lot of other things on your plate that could have been in the story. We could have talked about tomatoes and peppers and potatoes and even sunflowers. But we really should be grateful to the heritage of the Native American garden culture, because we really have adopted quite a few of their plants and some of their knowledge. Now, the handout that you got, if you'll turn it over, gives you several different styles, ways to plant a Three Sisters garden. One is the most traditional way, using the mound and planting basically in a circle, and the other methods are more like what we usually do in most of our gardens. The bean tower here, the main trick on a bean tower, remember that if you have beans growing and you overlook some of the beans and you don't pick them when they're young, the plant will think that it's finished and it will stop growing. So the problem with this one is that bean plant is going to get as tall as this pole. And if you can't reach it, there's going to be a bean way up there that's going to mature. And so the idea is, as tall as you are, that's tall enough. And don't let your bean poles get this tall. Shove this thing way down in the ground, Okay.